Let me begin, ladies and gentlemen, and I apologise to some of you probably know this before, because we begin to have fairly regular cast of characters, both at the top table and in the audience as well. But on behalf of my fellow members, excuse me, at the back, on behalf of my fellow members of the Hammersmith Residents, Board of Residents Commission on Council Housing, I'd like to welcome you to our third public meeting, public hearing. This is the third of 9 public hearings over the next 2.5 months, which we'll be holding in all parts of the borough. My name is Steve Hill, and I have the honour and privilege to be the chair of the Commission. In due course, I want to say a few words about the background to the Commission, but first, let me say something about today's hearing and the way that we'll play this. As many of you will know, I was once a member of Parliament and as such served on several parliamentary select committees, including the famous and powerful Public Accounts Committee. And for our hearings in the course of our work, I've adopted the model of the Parliamentary Select Committee on these hearings, and that means that the Commission will interview witnesses, put questions to them, and have the opportunity for follow-up questions. And just as a select committee, members of the public are welcome to sit in and observe the proceedings, but of course the public doesn't take part in the proceedings, and that's how it will be in this and our other hearings. And that doesn't mean, however, that there won't be many opportunities for residents to communicate their views. In our newsletters and through our website, we've invited residents to make submissions, and we intend to publish them. I'll be very clear that we're always ready and happy to meet residents either individually or at public meetings, and some of these meetings have already been arranged. And please stay on at the end of the hearing to chat with members of the Commission. Most importantly of all, we've appointed an organisation whose job will be to be in intensive contact with residents to get their views and report them to the Commission. That organisation is called TPAS, the Tenant Participation Advisory Service, and I'm going to ask their representative, the Independent Tenants and Leaseholder Advisor Tom Hopkins, to say a few words shortly. But first, a little more on procedure and arrangements from Blackburn.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending our third public hearing. First thing I'll say, a few housekeeping matters. The gents' toilets is just out the door on the back there and straight ahead. The ladies is to reception and the other side. We don't have any scheduled drills or fire alarm tests today, so if the alarm does go off, please let's make our way to the outside of the town hall and meet in the forecourt. Today's agenda, you will have it in your seats and the packs that you've been provided. I'll hand over shortly to Mr. Tom Hopkins to give us a little bit more information on the Tenants and Leasehold Advisory Service that he's representing. I'll hand back then to Mr. Keith Hill to give us a background on today's hearing. We'll then have an overview of the theme of the hearing from Mr. Peter Bennington, who's an independent professional as part of the Residents Commission. We will then start our witness evidence, and I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for giving up some of their Saturday to come and talk to us today. First we'll hear from Mr. Mike England, the Director for Housing in Hammersmith and Fulham, Mr. Eric Cahill, Head of Housing Strategy in Hammersmith and Fulham, and Jane Martin, Head of Housing Management and Shelter Accommodation in Hammersmith. We will then take a short break, and we'll have a second set of witnesses, Mr. Ian Doolittle, partner and housing expert from Travers and Handlers LLP, and Ms. Clarissa Stoneham from the Citizens Advice Bureau. There'll be some questions posed as well by the Commission to our expert witnesses. We will then have a summary and conclusions from Mr. Keith Hill, and hopefully we can bring the meeting to a close at around 12:30. Just to echo Mr. Hill's comments that although this is a closed, it's a public hearing, but it's in a committee format and that there is an audience participation, there will be many opportunities for all of you to feed in. There are email addresses and telephone numbers as part of your packs and leaflets, and there's also an exit survey that you can leave some of your details or we can correspond with you going forward throughout the project. And just to say that when you are speaking, please ask the Commission and the witnesses to use the mic and hold them quite close to your mouths, just so it can be transmitted throughout the room. Now I'll hand over to Mr. Tom Hopkins to give us a little bit about the tenants and leasehold.
Good morning, everyone. A lot of familiar faces this morning. So just to recap, my name is Tom Hopkins. I work for an organisation called the Tenant Participation Advisory Service. We are an independent, not-for-profit organisation that specialises in working with local authorities on option appraisals to make sure that information given to tenants, leaseholders and freeholders is fair, impartial, balanced and understandable. Our role is to work with the Resident Commission to support them and their knowledge and understanding of the process, but also to work with the wider tenants and leaseholders throughout the borough, and that involves tenants and residents associations, third sector organisations, leaseholder groups and specialist organisations to actually understand the project and the implications for the future of social housing in Hammersmith and Fulham. We're given a commission until the end of the work of this good body, and that will be in the autumn. Our information is on the newsletters and you can contact us for any free confidential advice on any questions, concerns or worries that you may have around the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tom. Now, let me, for those who have not attended our public hearings before, say just a few words about the background to this hearing, and indeed the background to the work of the Commission. I will be brief. The establishment of the Commission arises out of a promise made in the Labour election manifesto in last year's local elections. And as a Commission, we have two tasks. One is to explore ways in which tenants and residents in general might be given more control over the future of their homes and estates. In other words, we're looking at the future governance of council housing in Hammersmith and Fulham. And our second task is to look at ways in which more investment might be secured for council housing in Hammersmith and Fulham to improve housing services and perhaps to build more social housing. Now, there's nothing unusual about the tasks we've been given. In housing jargon, it's known as a social housing stock options appraisal, and it looks at the condition of the housing stock, the future costs of repairs and modernisation, how to pay for them, and how residents can affect decisions taken about council housing. And such stock options appraisals have been carried out scores of times, hundreds of times, up and down the country. But there's one important difference here in Hammersmith and Fulham. These stock option appraisals are normally carried out by council officers and other experts behind closed doors. The unique aspect of what's happening here in Hammersmith and Fulham is that the appraisal is being carried out by a commission comprised of 9 residents and 4 independent outsiders, and the residents of the commission will have the final say in what is recommended. And the appraisal is being carried out. And the appraisal is being carried out in public, because we wanted residents to be confident that our proceedings were as open, as transparent, and as honest as possible. So you, the audience, have an active role in the hearings, the important role of witnessing the work of the Commission. You are the public part of the equation. Now, I want to emphasise that there are no foregone conclusions. We as a Commission are completely open-minded. Yes, we'll consider what a stock transfer has to offer. Equally, we'll explore what's achievable under retention. That is to say, the council remaining as the landlord. And all the time, we have two abiding objectives: giving residents greater control over their homes and providing excellent housing services and meeting housing needs, including new homes if possible, whilst at the same time recognising that the wishes of residents are paramount and that services need to be affordable. I want to emphasise that it is not the job of the Commission to decide the future of council homes in Hampstead and Fulham. It is the job of the Commission to make a recommendation to the Council about the way forward, and it will then be for the Council to decide what recommendation to adopt. Above all, any proposal affecting the future ownership of council homes, if it comes to that, will be decided by tenants in a ballot. The residents are in charge, and that's as it should be. So, we continue our work as a Commission today with one straightforward and basic, very important question: what impact would there be on tenants' rights and security of tenure? And I'm going to ask one of our independent experts on the Commission, Peter Berrington, to introduce these proceedings. Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. As you know, each of the hearings has a theme, and the theme today on tenants' rights and security of tenure may seem a narrow theme. However, I hope that it will be broadened out in the discussion, because at the heart of the Commission's inquiries is the question of what could enable residents to feel safe in their homes. Now, the idea that the Council can sell the land that residents' homes are on represents one kind of threat. But perhaps the idea that their home and the land that it's on could be transferred to a housing association represents another kind of threat. And these are not the only issues which bear upon people's tenancies and their sense of safety. There are wider financial and social pressures which can have a bearing on people's ability to maintain their tenancies. And the protection of residents sits on the range of services that are provided to both enforce tenancy agreements and to support tenancies. So I hope we will also hear today about some of the issues that concern tenancy agreements and the pressures which residents are under. Above that, the Council is responsible for producing a tenancy strategy which defines the type of tenancies which should be available in the social housing sector. So we would want to understand the Council's position on its tenancy strategy, first of all. But then we need to go on to explore the differences between the kind of tenancies that the Council can offer, secure tenancies, and the kind of tenancies that a different kind of organisation, a housing association, can offer, which are known as assured tenancies. And that will take us into the landscape of legalities that I know Ian Doolin will be able to help us with later on. And then finally, I hope we will be able to understand that residents in council stock hold different types of tenancy agreement. And of course, there are also residents who are subtenants of leaseholders. So there is a variety of tenures that residents have, and we need to understand how any change of ownership could impact on you.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Can I say that I'm told that all these microphones are primed, and if there's a red light on them, you just use them. Don't switch the microphones on after you've used them. So, without further ado, we move into our first session of witness evidence, and I'm very pleased to welcome three officers from housing in Hammersmith and Fulham to our proceedings. That's Mike England, who's the lead director for housing,
Would you like to begin, Mike?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Is that the right volume to speak at? Could people hear me? Yes, that my core role within the authority is that I'm responsible for the Council's housing strategy. I also have responsibility for the area of housing need and really access into social housing in the borough. So I'm responsible for dealing with homelessness, temporary accommodation, the housing register and the allocation of both council property and nominations into housing association property. Over the last few months I've also taken on the role of joint lead director for the whole service with my colleague Kath Corbett, who I think you'll meet at future sessions. And I'm also at the moment the senior officer responsible for this exercise and for being the link between the Commission and the local authority.
Jane.
Hello, is that right? Yeah, okay. Hello everybody, my name's Jane Martin. I'm the Head of Neighbourhood Services and my role is to manage the housing management service in the north of the borough. So that's managing tenancies and leases.
Sorry, I can't hear properly.
Okay, is that better?
I think probably if you speak a bit closer without doing
Okay.
that kind of buzz.
Right, okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So yeah, just to recap, I manage a team in the north of the borough that provides a housing management service for tenants and leaseholders, and I also manage the sheltered housing service which is across the borough.
Hello, my name is Aaron Carhill. I'm the housing strategy manager for the borough. My responsibility is primarily the housing strategy. I report to Mike on that, and then underneath that there's a number of subsidiary documents we mentioned: the tenancy strategy, housing allocation scheme, and also do some priority work on the home buy allocation scheme, and then providing central advice on affordable housing to planning colleagues and occasionally advice to Jane on housing matters that are.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Aaron. And let me repeat my warm welcome and thanks to you all. Let me kick off the questioning by asking you this question. And I throw it out to all of you, and I hope the way in which we can deal with this will be that if you want to add a supplementary to what one of the colleagues has said, that you'll come in, just as I would expect members of the Commission to be coming in and asking supplementaries as well. So let me put this question to you. Could you please talk us through the Council's tenancy strategy and how it affects council tenants?
Okay, if I kick off with that, and maybe if I talk in two sections. First of all, what it is and what it says. But secondly, the sorts of issues that arise when the council is thinking about what to put in this document. So the current tenancy strategy, I think, was agreed in October of 2012 and implemented in the following March. That's March of 2013. And broadly, as has been said, it tries to set a framework for the sorts of tenancies that should be offered to tenants in social housing in the borough. So it does have some implications for tenants of housing associations, but also, as has been said, it mainly relates to local authority tenants. And the agreement that we have in place now defines the tenancies that are given in certain circumstances. So if the tenant who's moving into new accommodation is an older person or has a vulnerability, and there we're talking about somebody who has a disability or has a mental health problem or has a learning disability, they will be offered a lifetime tenancy. So it's a lifetime secure tenancy, and they have that until they leave or until, unfortunately, they're no longer with us. For most other tenants who move into their accommodation, they are offered a 5-year fixed term tenancy with a 1-year probationary tenancy on the front of it. So the jargon is 1 + 5. 1 year probationary tenancy plus a 5-year fixed term. And most of the tenancies are offered on that basis. In a few specific instances, the the fixed term tenancies are shorter, at 2 years, or a probationary year plus 2, so 1 plus 2. And they relate to a limited number of cases where the new tenants are very young people, and where if effectively they don't have much experience of handling a tenancy, or where the tenants have an unfortunate history. There may have been a history of antisocial behaviour or criminal behaviour, and the authority wants to look at how the tenancy goes, or 1 or 2 other specialist instances as well. But broadly, the position is that for older and vulnerable people, lifetime tenancies. For everybody else, it's a 5-year fixed term. However, we are at a point of change now, because, as we heard at a previous session, the Council has just agreed a new housing strategy last month, and that signalled the intention to make a change in the tenancy strategy. And the core change is to revert to lifetime tenancies, lifetime secure tenancies, in all but a very limited number of cases. So we have to go out for a formal consultation on that process in the next few weeks, actually, but we would envisage that by the time we get to the autumn, we'll be back to a position in which most new tenancies are lifetime secure tenancies. Where there's a little bit of uncertainty still, and this will be subject of the consultation that we're about to issue, is whether there is still a case in a few instances for sticking with short-term, fixed-term tenancies. And again, they relate to the sorts of instances that I've just spoken about. If the council is offering accommodation to people whose history with tenancy is not a good one, there may still be a case for us looking at shorter-term tenancies to see how it goes, and then if it's successful, to issue a lifetime tenancy. But that's something that we'll be seeking views on. So that's quite a long explanation, but quite a fundamental change back, I think, in the next few months to lifetime tenancies. Just on the second point, and I'll do this very briefly, in terms of the sorts of considerations that have arisen in thinking about how to do this. Some of them are pretty obvious, some of them are less obvious, I think. The obvious one, and the key reason why the new administration has reverted back to lifetime tenancies, is the very basic one of security, really, which is that for the person the family who's moving into the new secure tenancy, it gives them that extra degree of security that they know that as long as they keep to the terms of their agreement and they pay the rent and they contribute towards the community, they have that home as long as they need it. And that's the consideration that has borne most heavily on the current administration. The arguments the other way, just so that the Commission is aware of what they are. There are 3, I think. The third one of which is by far the most important. One consideration is the thought that it is anyway good practice every now and again to review how a tenancy has gone, a review between a landlord and a tenant, and therefore it might just be a good idea in terms of good practice to see whether a tenant might want to move elsewhere or their circumstances have changed and they can buy or whatever. Secondly, and this is something that the other councils have taken a view on, you could argue that having a fixed end to the tenancy, or a point at which there has to be a review before it's renewed, means that there's that extra reason why the tenant would operate their tenancy successfully, either in paying rent or in contributing towards the community. But the third one is by far the most important. And the third one is around the efficiency with which the council's assets are used. And just very briefly, the issue here is this. Here and in most other London boroughs, we have the anomaly of having quite a large number of council tenants who are very overcrowded in their homes, but equally quite large numbers of tenants who are under-occupying their homes. And it has been thought that one big advantage of a fixed-term tenancy is that it would make it easier to make better use, more efficient use of the accommodation that's available. And really it's a question of what balance or what weight you put on that consideration. But it is an issue in a borough like this, of course, because the practical implications of having accommodation which is not used to its greatest efficiency means that people who are trying to become council tenants, people who are in temporary accommodation, people who are in bed and breakfast, are maybe staying that little bit longer if we're not making the most effective use of the housing stock that we've got. But on balance, the current administration has said we want to revert to lifetime tenancies. We think there is an issue about under-occupation, but we're going to think of other ways to address that.
That's a very interesting answer. Thank you very much. Before I go on to other members of the commission, this issue of under-occupation has been raised in our hearings before. What proportion of the council's stock do you reckon is actually under-occupied?
That's a cracking question, Chair. Interestingly enough, we don't have an exact answer, and I suspect there isn't a local authority in London that doesn't have an exact answer, because people's circumstances change all the time, and sometimes there are people living in property, sometimes they're declared to us and sometimes they're not. What we do know, though, is that it's a very substantial percentage, and I've asked this question recently, and we reckon it's at least 25% of homes are under-occupied to some degree. Now, of course, often that's just because of household circumstances, and people have moved away, and some people will move back. And this isn't a question of tenants having done anything wrong, or that being a problem with the tenancy. I think the issue is, though, that we and other social landlords, housing associations and local authorities, I think need to find a way of talking to our residents about how we make better use of the housing stock. And we're not talking here about requiring people to move. I think it's talking to residents about when their circumstances change later in life, the kids have left, what sort of things they are thinking about in their lives about where they're living, and what sort of offers of accommodation would they like to see that they think they might be interested in moving to. So it's not something I think that there's a straightforward answer to, but we are going to have to think more carefully about how we approach this, I think.
I think we recognise the sensitivities of this subject, and obviously we're not going to probe on this occasion in vast detail into this. I know to show you wants to ask the question. But let me say that 10 years ago, when I was the nation's housing minister, I think the national figure for under-occupation in social housing was identified at 8%. So if you think here in Hammersmith and Fulham that it may be as high as 25%, maybe as high as 25%, it's all a matter of definition, I appreciate, then nevertheless sounds like there is a particular issue there.
I think there is, and I don't think we're alone, and I think what's changed is that the rate of turnover in social housing has dropped quite dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. I think for pretty obvious reasons. It's to do with the difficulty of people moving out into other forms of accommodation. And in a borough like this, where very large proportions of the population simply can't afford to rent privately or buy, it's much more difficult for people in social housing to move on if that's what they want to do. Because there's a lower turnover, there are fewer opportunities for people to move around. I think that's the core explanation.
I don't want to walk this, Shirley, over to you.
Is this working? Yeah. Just to clarify for everybody, it would be really useful to define what is meant by under-occupation. And I'm really interested in whether individual councils are able to really use their discretion in this. So, for instance, if an ageing couple or anybody have family that have left home and they've got a 2-bedroom place, the fact they've got a spare room that may be needed if they're going to have a social life, if they're going to have family life, if they're going to have carers staying occasionally, would that automatically count as being under-occupied? Or can the council actually decide that under-occupation only means having 2 spare bedrooms, for instance?
I think we've probably got a problem with the phrase, actually, because the phrase is a jargonistic phrase that comes from council schemes of allocation. So the answer to your first question, the technical definition, is if we were offering that home to that family now, how would it match with what the scheme of allocation says that they need? That's the first thing. So that's the definition. Just to be clear, the tenant has an absolute right to stay in their home, whether they are quotes under occupying or not. And there's no requirement on people to move if they don't want to. What the council does have, though, is lots of discretion about where people do want to move, what sort of offers it's able to make them. And what often happens, and as happens here, is that if people do want to move to smaller accommodation, they get a very high priority. In fact, they get the top priority for allocations because it's so valuable for the local authority to get hold of the larger accommodation that's being vacated. And alongside that, there is lots of discretion with any financial compensation or financial incentives that are offered to people to move. So at the moment now, we are up at, I think it's £2,000 per room given up, is the payment that's made to somebody moving. I think the issue for us, sorry I'm taking a bit of time here, but it's quite an interesting area. I think the issue for us as a local authority and for other social landlords is whether we're asking the right question here about under occupation. And I wonder if the question that we asked was, what is the value to us of getting hold of an extra 4-bed flat that the existing tenants are willing to move out of? And if the value to us is more or less the value of getting a new 4-bedroom home built, maybe we need to look hard at what some of these financial arrangements are that we're offering. And so maybe we just need a bit more radical thinking, really, about how we do this better.
I know Anthony Wood has now got a supplementary on.
Yes, mine. We talked about under-occupancy. What about over-occupancy? Do you have any figures on that? Because clearly, as you said, we have to strike a balance between the two. There's obviously there's clearly issues regarding over-occupancy of property. How do you address that? How do you address that balance?
Well, we define overcrowding or over-occupancy in the same way as we define this under-occupation, which is that it's in relation to the size of accommodation that the family would be allocated if they were moving in for the first time. And I don't have a figure in my head for the total number of households who are overcrowded. What I do have in my head is a figure for the number of council tenants who are overcrowded by 2 bedrooms. That is that they are at least 2 bedrooms short of what they would normally be allocated, and that which is severe overcrowding if you think about what that means. And that figure is around about 300. And if you think about the consequences for the family of that being the case, and I'm thinking in particular of the consequences for children in that family who are having to do homework and having to grow up in that environment, it's clearly a huge priority for us to try and do something about that. And as I think you're pointing out, there is a linkage between our ability to do something about that and our ability to get hold of accommodation of the right size. And that's another reason why we need to be better, I think, at handling the question of the efficiency with which we use our housing stock, and think of better ways, really, of helping residents to move through the system as their household circumstances change.
Well, I think we've picked up on a very important theme here, which I'm sure the Commission will want to come back to. But our theme today is primarily tenure, and I'm going to ask Claire to come in with a further question on that subject.
Hello.
What different types of tenancy and tenancy agreement does the Council use presently for the tenancies it lets?
Do you want me to?
Jane.
Yes, hello, hi. We have a standard tenancy agreement. So we have one tenancy agreement, and there are a number of options on there for different types of tenancy. So as Mike has already said, we have the lifetime tenancy, and then we have an introductory tenancy for a year, and which then automatically converts into a lifetime tenancy. And then we have introductory 2-year flexible and 5-year flexible tenancies. So that's essentially our tenancy agreement. The terms of that tenancy are the same. As I say, it's a standard agreement, and the tenancy agreement basically is a contract between the tenant and the landlord, which sets out the rights of the tenant and the rights of the landlord. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Anything more on that one? No? Then we go on to Shirley. Shirley.
Okay, what are the key issues around tenancy enforcement at the moment? And are there any particular areas of good practice currently in the borough? Or you might even want to tell us about good practice that you aspire to, that you've seen elsewhere, perhaps?
Okay, this is another one for me. I think the two key issues for us currently in terms of enforcement are around rent arrears and also antisocial behaviour. I think it's fair to say that we're moving towards a more supportive approach in managing our tenancies. So we try to sustain as many tenancies as we possibly can. I mean, there are some enforcement options open to us, which we do use. So warning letters, and then a notice of seeking possession, which is the formal legal notice, prior to actually applying to court for a hearing. And then the last resort is obviously eviction. We serve about, for low-level antisocial behaviour, for example, which is something that my team manages, we serve about 200 or 300 warning letters a year, and then about 20 notices, and last year we had just less than 10 evictions. So I think that shows, through the escalation of the process, that we do manage to solve a lot of problems at the very early stages before we have to move on to that formal legal process.
Laura.
I just wanted to ask, what kind of face-to-face interventions do you use to tackle tenancy enforcement issues?
Okay, so if I use antisocial behaviour as an example, and low-level antisocial behaviour, the first thing that we do is, if we receive a report from a resident that they're experiencing problems, either with a neighbour or more generally in the area that they live, we offer an appointment for that person to come and meet with the housing officer. That can either be at the housing office or it can be at home. So we take a full account of what the problem is. And then if somebody's identified as actually causing that problem, we would invite that person in and do an interview with them. Again, one of the things that we're moving more towards is offering mediation as a solution to solving problems, particularly between neighbours. So we work very closely with an organisation called Calm Mediation. So obviously that's a face-to-face intervention that we use. Was there anything else that you wanted me to expand on?
I was also wondering if there was different options available for people who approve rent arrears, and if there was individual support around that. Yeah,
I don't personally manage rent arrears for general needs, but I do for the sheltered service. So again, it's very much about getting out and speaking to people about problems that they may be experiencing in paying their rent. Working very closely with colleagues in housing benefit to make sure that tenants have access to all the benefits that they may be entitled to. One of the initiatives that we're looking at the moment for the White City office is to have somebody from the credit union who will actually be based at the office each day of the week. So obviously residents can come in and speak to the credit union about the services that they offer as well.
Shirley?
Yeah, I'm interested that you said that you're moving more towards supportive. So that suggests you're moving from somewhere less supportive, possibly more enforcement orientated. I wondered if you could just briefly tell us what has influenced that move towards supportive, because obviously we'd like to know, it could obviously go back in the other direction. So what has influenced the current approach, which sounds very positive?
I think, learning from best practice from other organisations. I think the fact that we have had a change in political administration as well determines that approach to some extent. Just generally realising, I think, as a professional organisation, that is the way to go, and that is the best way to actually sustain tenancies. Obviously, it ties in with some of the things that Mike's been talking about, about availability of homes, and we are a social landlord. And we owe responsibility to our tenants to help them to sustain their homes. We don't want to increase homelessness.
Could I just add briefly to that very good answer, I think, which is that I think that there is something else happening here, which is that the financial pressures and the financial circumstances that tenants are living in are becoming more complicated and in some instances more difficult. And I'm thinking in particular of benefit changes. So we have, I think, Jane, about 650 households who have been affected by the reduction of the spare bedroom subsidy or bedroom tax, depending on what you want to call it. We have a small but growing number of tenants who are affected by the overall benefit cap, which is the restriction on the total amount of benefits that can be received by any one household, and that's restricted to £500 a week. And where people are affected by that, the shortfall is taken from their housing benefit, so that's an immediate threat to their tenancy in effect. And what's coming at us down the track is a much bigger issue, because what's coming at us down the track is universal credit. The principles around universal credit are that it's online based, people will have to apply for it, the money will go direct to the tenant rather than to the landlord. And so that bundle of issues really means that I think local authorities, we and other local authorities, are going to have to think in a slightly different way about the relationship with our residents, and by definition I think it has to be more supportive and understanding their individual circumstances and supporting their ability to access those benefits and to deal with it, and that's not just the fact that that's the right thing to do. There's also a very direct financial reason why the authority will have to do that, because in the same way that these things are making life more difficult for some residents, if that results in a non-payment of rent, it will make it much more difficult for the local authority as well, and therefore more difficult to deliver a good service for residents as a whole.
Very interesting, Peter.
Thanks, Chair. Could I just check? Two questions. One is just to check, Jane. Were the figures you were giving us just for your part of the borough, or for the borough as a whole, with 200 warning letters and 10 evictions?
That was for low-level antisocial behaviour across the borough.
The borough as a whole?
Yeah.
Can you speak up, please?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Thanks for that. I just wanted to check that. But could I just follow up Mike's point there by asking that if what you said earlier about the turnover of social housing reducing because of wider changes in the housing market, and what you've just said about the potential threat of universal credit and other benefit changes suggests that actually you might expect an increase in demand for social housing as a corollary of that. Is that your thinking?
Yes, I think that's right. I think both of those things are true, and added together, that makes the prospect of quite a difficult set of circumstances, and we're already seeing it. So if you look at the sharpest indicator of that is the number of applications that we get from people who are homeless, and the number of people that we accept as homeless. So last year, that's 14-15, the year that finished in March, we accepted, I've got the exact figure in my head, we accepted 444 households as homeless. 2 years prior to that, we accepted 201. So our acceptances have doubled in that short period. And if you look at where those applications are coming from, the growth, all of that growth is from one area, and where it's coming from are people who, for a variety of reasons, are losing their tenancies in the private rented sector. And the overriding reason why that's happening, two actually. One is that landlords are recognising that they can maybe get more money renting at the market or selling. But secondly, it's people where the restrictions on benefit are meaning that they can't afford the rent. It's as straightforward as that. It's nothing to do with how they manage their tenancy. They simply can't afford to stay in the property that they're in, and they come to the local authority and we pick them up as homeless. And so to come back to your question, Peter, I think you're right. I think as we go forward, the effect of the benefit changes will both mean increasing pressures on existing council tenants, but it will also increase the pressure on the local authority and on local housing associations for people who would like to become social housing tenants. And I guess that just reinforces the point that we were discussing earlier about making the best possible use of the stock that we've got and making sure that we use it efficiently.
Mike, you mentioned about universal credit, and obviously that's going to be an increasing problem. What I'm concerned with is there's been a reduction in frontline staff with regards to benefit in the past, and obviously bringing in universal credit from the government's point of view is going to reduce the bureaucracy, because universal credit is going to be paid directly to the residents. However, as you said, measures need to be put in place to advise people who do get into difficulty with universal credit. How are you going to find resources locally within the council to actually assist people in trying to avoid getting into financial difficulties?
Gosh, that's a huge question. I mean, I suppose what I'd say to you is I can pretty much guarantee that there isn't a local authority in London which has got a proper answer to that question, and we're only just starting to get our heads around it, I think. But I think I'd answer it in two ways. The first way is that if you think about what this will look like in 5 years' time, when the government says that the universal credit will be fully in, we may then have at least 20,000 households in the borough who are claiming universal credit, not just social housing tenants, but people across the borough. A good proportion of those, most of those people will be perfectly capable, obviously, of claiming universal credit successfully, but a goodly proportion will need support in doing that. They may be clients of social services, they may need support for all sorts of reasons, and so we are going to have to think as a local authority with our partners, statutory and voluntary partners, about what sort of support network is going to have to be available to make sure that people are able to claim successfully. And I think that's across the board, and I think that's a very major enterprise and challenge for us as an authority. If we just think about the position of the council as a landlord and support for council tenants, I think the same applies, but there's another factor here as well, which is the point that I made about the financial aspects of this. I think the position is that from within the council's housing resources, from within the housing revenue account, we are going to have to find the the staffing resources or carve out the staffing resources to provide this support in order to make sure that people claim successfully, in order that we get the rent in that will allow us to provide the services that that people need. So I think we're going to have to, within the HRA, find a way of finding the resources to allow us to do that. I think that's inevitable.
Thanks for that, Mike. Angela Mason.
Thank you for your answers so far. This is a question that's largely about numbers, so you may not have them to hand. I think it would be useful for us to have them in due course. Because you've got my mind racing through the issues of the efficient use of the housing stock and your tenancy strategy sitting behind that. So I just wonder, for example, last year, what was the total turnover in your housing stock? If you know, how many of those went to new applicants? We already know 400 or so of those were to homeless applicants. And I'm also sort of idly curious, although I think you may not know the answer to this, in the world of 5-year fixed tenancies, at the end of those 5 years, how many of them, as it were automatically renewed? In other words, what was the churn at the end of that? And by the way, another question for Aaron, just if he knows it, is if we could match supply with demand, just who's on the active waiting list. I know that's a lot of numbers, you may need to come back to us, but I think it will give us some sense of demand, turnover, total churn, and so on and so forth.
Okay, in terms of nominations to social housing last year, around 600. And
Sorry,
suggest,
speak up, please.
Yeah, about nominations to social housing stock, so that's council housing and housing association, around 600 last year, and I'm pretty sure around 400 or so, I think to check, is council housing, with the remainder being housing association stock. That's the rough numbers we're talking about. In terms of the 5-year tenancy question, we haven't actually got there yet, still only been granted for a few years, so we're still quite a way, although there are some 2-year ones that will be needing to be considered, and there's around 70 of those, 79. So that's where we're at. And I just wanted to touch on the overcrowding issue and the amount of large family accommodation the council actually has. It has around 3,000 homes that are 3 bedrooms or more. So that's the kind of quantum of large family accommodation that the council has. So if we imagine it's 5%, 10% or 25%, it is of that 3,000 number. And obviously the question there is around incentives given that you are security of tenure.
Right,
just very briefly, Aaron's right about the total of new lettings. It's around 600 or slightly less, I think, 570 or 580. I suppose the important point about that is to express that as a proportion of the total amount of social housing in the borough, which is if you add the number of council homes together to the number of housing association homes, it's somewhere around 25,000 social housing properties. So my mental arithmetic isn't good, but 600 out of 25,000 is between 2 and 3%, isn't it? It's very small. Now housing associations will have other lettings that we don't see, but even if the total number of lettings was 4 or 5%, that's less than half of what the turnover was 15 or 20 years ago. In terms of the waiting list, we can provide those figures very easily. I think where the pinch points are is that we have relatively large numbers of smaller sized accommodation, sheltered accommodation, and studios and 1-beds in relation to the demand. It's the other sizes where we have a major problem: the 2s, the 3s, and the 4s, and above. So, but we can give you the relationship between where the waiting list demand is from and where the supply is by bedroom size, which will show that quite starkly.
That would be very helpful to have that. Now, I'm quite conscious of time and need to move on. I know that colleagues have got 2 or 3 more questions that they want to put to our witnesses. So can I turn now to Lorna?
I just wanted to ask what your current uptake or take-up is of right to buy, and what are the current trends?
Okay, shall I begin? Shall I get this? I'm winging this a bit, the discount changed quite dramatically, I think, in 12-13. So for the years up to 2012-13, it was very low. I mean, I think it was a handful, less than 10, certainly a year. The discounts were then increased twice. The maximum discounts were increased twice. So from memory, up to 75,000, and now up to 100 or 103, I think it is, with an inflationary increase. That brought a big increase in applications. So I think in that first year, 12-13, the applications went up from about 40 to up to 400, and the number of completions now is in the area of 60 or 70 a year for the last couple of years. But I think we would probably anticipate that would start to drop again, because I think what we've seen is a bulge relating to the increase in the discounts, and that probably we would start to see it decline again. But they're the sort of numbers anyway. Again, we can give you those in detail, but those are the ballpark figures.
Again, very useful to have those detailed figures. Laura?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so you mentioned that you had 400 applicants and only 70 of those completed. Can you give me some reasons as to why there's such a big difference between the figures?
The main reason that people would apply but weren't successful is that it turned out that in the end they couldn't afford it. That their incomes weren't high enough, and the key factor there is that even with the greatly increased discounts, this is the third most expensive borough in the country for house prices and rent. So that even with a discount of £100,000, if the property that you're seeking to buy has a market value of 500, 600, 700,000, then you're going to need a substantial income to buy it. And so that's the core reason why many people weren't successful.
And then we've got a couple more questions on leaseholders. Peter? Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. I just wanted to ask, we have a number of residents, I imagine, who are not secure tenants of the council, but are subtenants of leaseholders. And I just wondered what sort of relationship they have with the authority, and what their security of tenure is, and what services are available to them.
Okay, I'll start by trying to answer your question, and Mary might want to add to it. But essentially, it's likely that tenants of leaseholders will hold what we call a short hold tenancies. So tenants of leaseholders will have a relationship with the leaseholder, who will be their landlord, and our relationship as a council is with the leaseholder. So I think, hopefully very simply, that's the answer to the question. Do you want to add anything?
I don't need to add, but we do know that there are occurrences of AST issues, overcrowding of private rented housing, which is what it is in effect, and it does create neighbour nuisance issues. Just came across in some of the housing strategy responses I kind of read through when I'd recently undertook the consultation process.
Can I ask if you know anything about the numbers involved?
I think we've got about 4,000 leaseholders in total. In terms of breaking those down into people who bought their homes and kept their homes, and actually and those who've actually sold off, and then private landlords have come in. I think we'd have to do a bit of homework there, and it may be that information is difficult to access, but there's something we can look at and come back to.
Very happy to provide that. I mean, for the sake of completeness, it's probably worth mentioning a couple of other things as well. One is that we have a small number of council properties that are occupied directly on a temporary basis by homeless households that we've placed there temporarily. It's about 150, I think. And also, slightly bizarrely, following on from Peter's question, there are a number of properties where they've been bought as leasehold properties, and the council has entered into a tenancy agreement with the leaseholder in order to house a homeless family temporarily in that property. So we're in the bizarre position of having sold the property, probably at a discount, and we're now renting it back from a landlord at a private rent, which might be 2.5, 3 times what the council rent would be. But it's worth our while to do that because it's better accommodation than bed and breakfast or something else. And it's not large numbers. If you're interested in the numbers, we can give you those. But just to complete the picture, there are a number of instances where that's the case.
And I think probably rounding up on this session, Matthias, I know, wants to still on the issue of council house sales. Matthias.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, before we break, could I ask a point of how you've arranged this? We don't have the benefit of TV cameras. If we're watching the Commission from Parliament, we'd be able to see the faces of the ancestors. Can we do their seats differently so they're at an angle? Because I can't hear, even when we ask them. It stands at mumbles. If you rejig that in the break, we might stand a better chance of hearing properly.
I completely understand the issue that you raised there. It is difficult, and I think actually there are 2 answers to the question. One is we will ask our witnesses to perhaps speak up a little more than they have been. And secondly, let me point out that all of these, I don't think we can rearrange the structure of the session at this point, but let me point out that actually all of these proceedings are being videoed, and that actually it is possible to watch all of these proceedings via the Hammersmith and Fulham Residents Commission on Council Housing website. So you can access these things and see all of our proceedings on YouTube whenever you want to do that. But we'll have a think about this issue of audibility, which I do appreciate is a question. Matthias, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The Commission is interested in finding out the number of housing stocks sold and how much revenue was collected and how much of that was invested in providing affordable accommodation. That's question number 1. The next one, I'm also interested in finding out the number of tenants on the waiting list. The third one, the number of properties which are empty. The fourth one is what is your budget and how much debt are you servicing and how much interest payments are you paying for that debt. The last one, how much rent is received and how much of that is reinvested in providing services and how much is spent on administration. Thank you.
That's quite a heavy set of questions. I think we understand you're not able to answer in detail on these, but obviously a note has been made and it would be very helpful if we could have a note in due course. But we're going to have a bite at some of these cherries.
I'll have a go. The first question is a monster of a question, actually, although it's a very interesting one, and indeed, because the sale started in 1980, I think. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but Mark, you can, given that we have 12,000 properties now and 4,000 leaseholders, you can add to that there will be a large number of houses in the borough that will have been sold. So we can go and do some research and see what the council's housing stock was in the late 1970s and 80s, and probably give you an answer to that. But you can see even from those numbers that the number of sales must have been at least 4,000. And so, given if you add the houses, I would estimate you're probably looking at 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, something like that total sales since the right to buy came in, and that would typically be the sort of ratio that you'd see in other London boroughs. The receipts that we've got from that, we can go back as far as we can. I'd be quite surprised if we can go back to 1980, but we'll do what we can. Generally speaking, what's happened to the receipts, actually, is that historically, apart from recently, the local authority was really only able to spend a quarter of them. And the rest would effectively be kept by government to reduce what was then housing subsidy. So effectively what was happening there was that nationally 75% of the receipts were being used to pay down the debt that was originally associated with the property via the subsidy system. And so I think the answer to that is that looked at over those 35 years, relatively little will have been reinvested directly in new homes, but we can try and give you an estimate of that. The current housing register is quite small. In 2013 we made a change. Prior to 2013 it was at about 11,000. The previous administration made some big changes to it. So at the moment it's quite small. It's at about 900 now. But the arrangements for that are about to change, and the criteria will be relaxed. So I would expect that this time next year it'll be up at something around 3,000. The number of empty properties I haven't got in my head, but we can give you that. And the financial questions, I think we should ask my colleague Kath Corbett to give you those. But just to give you an indication of the turnover, the gross spend and the gross rent take on the housing revenue account is around about 70 million. But we can give you the breakdown that you've requested between how much of that is servicing debt, how much is paying staff, and how much is providing direct services to tenants.
Nice. Have you got anything else?
I think my question was mainly in terms of the sales. The previous cabinet sold over 230 properties, housing property. I'm not looking back 30 years. I'm looking at maybe from the previous cabinet, how much properties we are sold 2012 to 2014 housing stock.
Okay, we can provide those figures for you, and also give an account of where the receipts went from those sales. So we're happy to do that.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that. My time has caught up with us. Look, I think this has been an extremely interesting session. We've learned a lot. You've given us very good context, social context for our work, and we're very grateful to you again for what you've given us, for the time that you've given up, and to say thank you very much indeed. Now we're going to break, ladies and gentlemen, for about 10 minutes. There are refreshments at the back. Please take advantage of them, and we will resume sharply at 11:25 for our second session. Thank you all very much indeed for listening so patiently and quietly. Thanks to all.